And this session with conversationists Rebeca Grynspan, Isabel Malo, Kelley Currie and Matthew Swift will take a closer look at these disparities. What are the key obstacles that keep women out of full economic participation? What can be done about them? And this concludes my service as an MC with you today. Enjoy the panel and the days to come. Goodbye.
Thank you very, very much, and an enormous congratulations to Hannah and to Silvana. The work that women's political leaders does around the globe is so incredibly important, as has been referenced many, many times just today, how important it is in 2020 and what has happened in 2020 and what the global pandemic has meant for the advancement of women in all sectors, in all careers, and in all walks of life. And so this is an incredibly timely discussion, and a special thank you to the Reykjavik Global Forum for having us all together to talk about these ever important issues. As introduced, I'm so excited to be joined in this conversation by Rebeca, Isabel, and Ambassador Kelley Currie. So thank you so much. This conversation this morning, or at least this morning on the East Coast in the US where I am, or in the afternoon or in the evening, wherever you might be in the world, is about equal pay, maternity and paternity leave, access to institutions, ownership and management of property. We are going to explore some of the most significant structural and legal challenges preventing equitable economic participation and paths to ensuring women's full integration into the formal economy. These panelists are going to discuss, and really, frankly, we're going to talk about how we dismantle barriers to women's economic empowerment with a focus specifically on the Americas, the Western Hemisphere. So Rebeca, I would like to go to you first. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think, as you can agree, very, very timely conversation. We have been hearing and talking about for months about the economic crisis that this pandemic has caused. But what we're also starting to hear is just the substantial negative impact it has had on women in the workforce, how it has disproportionately affected women. How can we identify the impact on women versus the impact on men when it comes to what has happened with the economy given the pandemic?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matthew, and hello to everybody in the panel. Let me start by saying that we know a lot. We know about the differentiated impact that the pandemic has had on women. The problem is that we need to put those numbers on the policy making in the table of those that are doing the policy making. And we know that women are underrepresented also in terms of policy making in the political positions to make their voices heard. But let me give you very quickly several indicators of the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on women, at least in the Latin American region. That is the region we are been working with. Well, first of all, the projection is that the poverty will increase for women 22% in Latin America, 22%, bringing the number of women under the poverty line to 118 million in our region. We know also that before the crisis, women worked mainly on the very vulnerable sectors that are under COVID-19, because they work in commerce, in hotels, in tourism, in the service industry. So the sectors that are more affected are where women work the most. 53% of women work in the vulnerable sectors under COVID-19. And we also know that women are overrepresented in the informal sector. Remember that in Latin America, 50% of the workforce is informal. So they don't have social security, they don't have social protection. And the projection is that in the 1st of January, when we will wake up in 2021, 2/3 of the labor force will be in the informal sector. And women, we know, is are underrepresented or overrepresented, in the informal sector.
Rebeca, I want to make sure to clarify one important thing, though. It is your assessment that the informal economy, participation in the informal economy is actually going to increase?
Yes. It's going to increase in Latin America in a moment where the informal sector is also disproportionately affected because of the pandemic. So it's a double hit in terms of poverty and inequality in the region. Let me give you one number that exemplifies this, Matthew. You know that the UN estimates that 90 million people in the world will go under extreme poverty, will increase extreme poverty because of COVID-19. You know that 1/3 is Latin American. 1/3 of that number is from Latin America, but we represent only 8% of the world population. So you can imagine the disproportionate impact on Latin America because of COVID-19, and women will be disproportionately hit also at the same time. We need to be very worried about these numbers. And one last thing, two things that are happening is that the stay at home to protect you from COVID-19 may represent stay at home forever for women. Yes, and that's part of the problem, because if they lose disproportionately employment, if they don't have the conditions to reconcile work and family, because, care services are very hit by the pandemic. So they will have to stay at home, and that will be a retrocess in terms of women's rights for all we have fought for during these last decades.
So Isabel, some very sobering statistics from Rebeca, and when thinking about how we address issues such as pay equity, when we think about how we get more women into the formal economy, it seems like this year we have taken an enormous step back.
Hello to everybody in the panel, and Matthew, thank you for that question. I couldn't agree more with Rebeca, and I'll just emphasize women overrepresented in the informal sector and underrepresented where decisions are being made. That's a very serious situation in the midst of COVID. When we look at the pay gap, we know the numbers, we know it has been increasing. Of course, we can expect, unfortunately, that as a result of COVID, that is not going to get any better. It's going to be worse. And if we look at financing, women's access to credit has usually been very, very difficult. We know that 80% of women's own credit needs are either underserved or are not served at all. So as the informal economy grows, as people, as Rebeca mentioned, are left out of jobs and pursue their own private entrepreneurship, will they have access to credit? We need to look at the specific barriers that are preventing women from accessing credit. When you look at the requirements, bank accounts. Now, bank accounts are beyond the reach of about 1 billion women worldwide. So if that's going to be a requirement for you to get credit, it's going to be very difficult for you to get that credit. However, women have proven over and over that they are better at meeting their commitments, their financial commitments. So this is not only an issue of possibilities for women, but this is also an issue of losing business. It is good business to incorporate women into the economy. It is good business to promote women-led enterprises, but it's not happening. And we see around the world gender bonds, and we see partnerships between financial institutions and women-led organizations, but still the gap is amazing. And other than a bank account, many times that can be replaced by land ownership. But where are women in terms of land ownership? Historically, in many regions, and Latin America is not foreign to that, land ownership has been somewhat reserved for males. In inheritances, this happens. So when land ownership is unavailable to women, that cannot be used as a collateral. So there again, women are being hit with not having the possibility of accessing credit for their own business. The gender pay gap, it's about 30%, and we are not seeing good numbers in spite of the efforts by many organizations, in spite of putting it out every year with measurements. And unfortunately, we have seen that COVID is also hitting women harder, as it has been mentioned. The care economy, the fact that they need to stay home, somebody needs to do the virtual schooling with the children, somebody needs to do the care for disabled members of the family or for older members of the family. Who's doing that? More often than not, women
often
that
the
are
women.
being yes.
Often
yes.
the women.
So,
and sorry, go ahead, please.
No. Go ahead, Matthew.
No, I think that's an important, very, very important segue to Kelley, because Kelley, I think first off, I remember fondly an interview that I did at Concordia with Senior Advisor Trump, talking specifically about the design, the different pillars related to WGDP, and establishing and changing these laws and these traditions in these countries that in certain cases do not allow women to inherit, in certain countries an extreme of do not allow women to open a bank account. And so you can't have conversations about more women entering the formal economy, how to build pay equity, without also addressing in certain countries an even more fundamental series of issues that really do affect women. What is WGDP as an initiative, as a program from the U.S. federal government? What are you doing to address this?
Well, thank you, Matthew. That is a great segue, because as Isabel noted, when you have these barriers, whether it's ability to get a bank account or to own and inherit property on an equal basis with men, these are so foundational. And they just put women, their starting mark is so far behind that it's almost impossible to catch up when you start so far behind. So this has been a core element of the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative, WGDP. And cultural practices that hold women back are some of the most challenging issues we need to deal with. And when we developed this program, we looked at the 5 areas where we thought could have the most impact. And we've already discussed a couple of them: access to finance, the ability to own and inherit property on an equal basis. But even more foundationally, we're looking at things like access to institutions. One of the reasons a lot of women can't get a bank account is because they don't have an ID card, because they are unable to go and get identification or get themselves legally registered without the permission of a male relative. The ability to travel freely and independently, and the ability to work in the same jobs and sectors as men. These are the 5 foundational areas that we believe, if we can work on addressing legal and regulatory barriers in these areas around the world, especially in the developing world, the potential is huge. And now more than ever, in light of the pandemic, the last thing we need is to put more barriers in front of economic recovery. We need women to be the drivers of the recovery, as this whole program, this whole conference is about, that if women don't work, nothing does. That's absolutely right. And so why would anybody in their right mind want to have barriers that make it harder for women to participate, get out of the informal economy and into the formal economy? We earlier this year had a study out of the White House that showed that if we tackled the barriers, in the legal barriers in just those 5 areas that I've mentioned, it could produce $7.7 trillion. That's trillion with a T, in additional global GDP. And I can't think of a time where we've needed that kind of engine of growth more than we do right now. So we're really working with our partners in Latin America. We're working with Colombia, Peru, Costa Rica, and a whole range of countries where we are seeing incredible responses from women who, when they're given these opportunities, when they're given the right training, whether it's entrepreneurship training that we're doing in Guatemala and Haiti, or some of the other things that we're doing across the region, their ability to succeed is incredible. And they are opening their own businesses, they're employing other women, they're helping other women build their skills and helping them to support their families. And they then those women and their families are supporting whole communities. And it has this incredible multiplier effect across these communities. And with Colombia in particular, we're really focused on how we help support women to move from that informal economy into the formal economy. And being able to access institutions, being able to get a business license and legally register your business so that you then are able to access those social protections is absolutely critical. So we are really focused on how we can do that. It seems like small things, and here in the United States, some of these are things that we just take for granted, but we know that across the developing world, making these changes can unlock incredible potential and opportunity for women and their families and their communities. So that's what we're focused on doing.
So we have just only a few minutes left, and we've raised awareness on exactly what problem we're facing. We've talked about the informal economy. We've talked about the access to the basic things that needs to change. I want to put all three of you on the spot here, and I ask for as short answers as possible, given how short we are in time. Rebeca, let's start with you. Multilateral institutions. Are there changes that need to be made to improve the ability of multilateral institutions to better help facilitate some of these needed changes for women in the workforce? Do you see any kind of urgent need or call to action to multilateral institutions? I'm so sorry, Rebeca, I think you're on mute.
Yes, what
Perfect.
we are doing is that we are calling for a coalition of countries for the economic empowerment of women, with the Vice President of Colombia and the Vice President of Costa Rica and several of us, because equality in law is very important for substantive equality. I completely agree with Isabel and with Kelley on that. It's a necessary condition, although it's not a sufficient condition. And there are so many things that we can do with the equality in the law. For example, in Latin America, 50% of the countries don't have any law to protect equal pay for equal work, for example, or maternity leave to 14 weeks. Many of the countries don't have yet a law suggests, or paternity leave that is less than 15 days in most of the countries in we're talking about, or paid domestic work that has no protection at all. Those are examples where we can be very concrete.
So more, and I would say more advocacy from the multilateral institutions to governments to say these changes have to happen now more than ever. Isabel, I can't help but flag you're the first female vice president of your country, the first female foreign minister of your country. You have something in common with our incoming vice president here in the United States. Remarkable signal to women all around the world of women leadership. But from a government perspective, what more needs to happen?
Well, the government needs to push for those legislative changes that have been referred to. However, not only the will of the government is enough. And I can mention, for example, things that we pushed while we were in government, such as paternity leave. Panama had no paternity leave before that legislation was passed. But I even regret to say that we were able to pass 3 days. It's horrible. The discussion that took place and the opposition to paternity leave. So we need, as you mentioned, Matthew, we need to continue to do advocacy for these issues because they're not understood. That same thing happened when I pushed for legislation for at least 30% women on boards. We passed that legislation. It came into effect last year. And you see over and over private and public sector institutions just fighting it and just arguing in every way why it doesn't apply to them or why they cannot comply with it. Because, of course, these women are nowhere, even though we all know that they're everywhere. So, yes, we need more leadership from government to pass these legislations, but we also need the support of multilateral institutions, and we also need the support of citizens. At the end, advocacy is needed.
Well, and in closing, that segues again perfectly. Thank you, Isabel, into what we're doing, because WGDP has been about partnerships from the beginning. And whether it's with the private sector, which is a huge part of what we're doing, is getting the private sector involved. We've leveraged billions of dollars in additional support from the private sector from a fairly modest U.S. government contribution. And that's been really incredible, especially in financial access and in helping women get move up the supply chain and get the skills and training that they need. It's been really incredible to see the response from the private sector. That has been one of the most heartening things about this. And their leadership and their innovation has been tremendous. And we're also, when you said call to action, we have a call to action at the United Nations right now. We've got more than 30, I think we're close to 40 countries now that have signed on, but we were proud to see the Vice President of Colombia was one of our first supporters and early supporters, and budgets can't support. Let's look at these low-cost, high-impact things that we can do in the developing world to really unlock women's potential. And so we're really focused on that with our call to action for women's economic empowerment right now.
I have to say, I think that's a fantastic way to close, and I really commend. I think it's at a time when partisanship just seems to be, not just in the United States, in countries all around the world, partisanship seems to be just abundant. Let's take a moment. I really want to flag this as the head of a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that WGDP is one of the most innovative, best things to come out of the Trump administration, and it is going to be a major part of the Trump administration's legacy going forward. I want to thank Rebeca, Isabel, and Kelley. Thank you so much for participating in this conversation, for your leadership, for your advocacy here. The key is action, not just talking about things, but action. And again, a huge congratulations to WPL and for the Reykjavik Global Forum. It's amazing what you all do. But thank you all so much for taking time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.